China just built a sodium battery that costs significantly less to produce. Lithium batteries have kept EV prices high because lithium is expensive and controlled by just 3 countries. The sodium battery works at -40 degrees, supports over 500 kilometers of range, and the first production vehicles arrive mid-2026. It's made from salt instead of lithium, which completely changes the supply chain problem. How does a battery made from salt instead of lithium change what you can afford? Battery-grade lithium carbonate hit $70,000 per ton in 2022, when the world went all in on electric vehicles. And suddenly, everyone needed lithium at once because every automaker was making the same bet that EVs would be the future. The price crashed after that because the market flooded with supply when mining operations ramped up, but the volatility never disappeared because 3 countries control 85% of the world's refined lithium, which means your clean car is chained to a supply line you don't control and a mining footprint nobody loves. Australia, Chile, and China produce almost all the lithium that becomes batteries, and that concentration of supply is the same geopolitical vulnerability that oil producers had for decades, where a single decision in one country can ripple through global markets and affect prices everywhere else. Every EV manufacturer is paying the lithium tax, whether they want to or not, because there's no alternative. And that tax flows straight into the sticker price of the car you're shopping for, while the automakers all pretend it's because of labor costs or materials science. A Tesla Model 3 costs what it costs partly because lithium is expensive, and partly because Elon knows you're trapped because where else are you going to go for an affordable EV when every manufacturer is paying the same lithium premium and every car has to account for those supply chain costs? The battery is the single most expensive component in an electric vehicle, sometimes representing 40% of the final price, which means when lithium prices spike, your EV suddenly costs $5,000 more for the exact same car with the exact same performance and range. That volatility is built into every EV on the market right now because manufacturers have to account for lithium price swings when they set their production budgets and negotiate battery supply contracts with CATL and LG and Samsung. They lock in prices months in advance, trying to predict where the market will be, and if lithium jumps, they either absorb the losses or pass them to customers who signed up for a price that was supposed to be fixed. And that's just the price problem, because there's also the degradation problem, where a normal lithium battery in your electric vehicle is good for maybe 2,000 to 3,000 charge cycles before it fades and loses capacity, which means if you charge your EV every other day, the battery might start losing range after 5 or 6 years. When that happens, the replacement cost can run $10,000 to $15,000 depending on the vehicle, because you're not just replacing cells, but replacing the entire pack and the BMS system and reconnecting all the thermal management. That's a wallet killer that most EV buyers don't think about when they're signing a 6-year loan on their new electric car. And dealers know this, which is why they push their extended warranty program so hard, because they know the battery degradation is coming. China looked at this entire situation starting in 2016 and decided the industry had it backwards, because everyone was saying sodium batteries were a dead end and good enough for golf carts and grid boxes, and nothing you would ever put in a real car where you needed performance and range and reliability. The entire Western battery industry had written off sodium as a failed chemistry that couldn't store enough energy to power anything worth driving. But CATL didn't blink and quietly poured nearly 10 billion renminbi into the problem and burned through close to 300,000 test cells, chasing a chemistry the rest of the world had already buried and forgotten. That's 300,000 prototypes just to crack one idea that everyone said was impossible, and they kept going even when it looked like they were wasting money and resources on something that would never work, because the rest of the industry was sprinting in a completely different direction, betting billions on lithium refinement and solid-state batteries and other technologies they thought were the future. In 2021, they became the first major battery maker on the planet to launch a sodium-ion product, while competitors were still laughing and saying it couldn't work and that they were wasting their time on a dead-end technology. Then, in April 2025 at CATL's first ever Super Tech Day, they pulled the cover off Naxtra, and the room understood instantly this was not a lab toy, but a production-ready technology that would change the entire battery landscape and force every other manufacturer to reconsider their strategies. Their sodium-ion chief technology officer put it bluntly: when he said sodium-ion is no longer confined to laboratories. And this is the company that already supplies Tesla and BMW and Mercedes with batteries. So when they say production ready, factories move because they know what that means for their supply chains and their cost structures and their market position. The specs on this battery don't even look real when you see them laid out, because they're so much better than what lithium offers in almost every category that matters to actual drivers. Start with the lifespan, because this is where sodium completely rewrites the financial equation for EV ownership and makes lithium look like a temporary solution that manufacturers have been charging permanent prices for. CATL says Naxtra exceeds 10,000 charge cycles, which is 3 to 5 times longer than a lithium battery, and means the battery is engineered to outlive the car wrapped around it and become a genuine long-term asset instead of a depreciating liability. If you're charging your EV every other day, that means your sodium battery might still have 80% capacity at 15 years, while a lithium battery in a car purchased today would have been dead and replaced 3 times by then, which changes the entire math of EV ownership. A battery that lasts the life of the car means you're not staring down a $15,000 replacement bill at year 6 or 7, right when the loan is almost paid off and you thought you were done spending money on the vehicle. It means a used sodium EV in the second-hand market keeps its value better because the battery isn't ticking toward failure the way a lithium EV does. That alone changes the total cost of ownership calculation because a sodium EV becomes cheaper to own than a lithium EV over the life of the vehicle, which means manufacturers will have to compete on that metric once customers understand the difference and realize they're overpaying for a shorter-lived battery. Then there's the cold weather performance, where CATL claims Naxtra keeps 90% of its usable capacity at minus 40 degrees, the temperature where a normal electric vehicle basically gives up and loses 20 to 30% of its range instantly, and the heater draws so much power that you're essentially stranded if you need to go anywhere far. Imagine driving through an Arctic morning and barely losing range while every other EV in the parking lot is watching their miles melt away, and the drivers are all frustrated because they bought a clean car and now it doesn't work when they need it most. That's why China is already running 3,000 battery swap stations across 140 cities, with over 600 in the freezing northern regions where lithium struggles most and where drivers need solutions that actually work in real winter conditions. These stations let drivers swap a depleted sodium battery for a charged one in minutes, instead of waiting 30 minutes to an hour at a charger. And that's only viable because sodium batteries are cheaper to produce, and the labor of swapping them makes economic sense when you're not replacing a $15,000 pack. The charging speed is also different, where CATL says Naxtra handles up to 5C peak charging, and reports from China claim a semi-truck battery fully charges in about 20 minutes. That's not just faster charging, but genuinely practical charging, where you stop for coffee and walk out with a full battery instead of planning your entire trip around charger locations. And in safety testing, it passed China's brutal new GB 38031 standard, staying free of smoke and fire even when they crushed it and drilled into it and sawed into it, which is a safety record that lithium batteries don't match because lithium can catch fire if the cell gets damaged. But none of those improvements would matter if sodium batteries were still more expensive to produce, because then manufacturers would just absorb the cost and keep EV prices where they are, and pocket the difference in their margins while customers never see the benefit. The real game changer is that sodium is one of the cheapest materials on Earth that you can extract and refine at scale, which means there's no lithium tax built into the supply chain, and no vulnerability to supply chain constraints, and no price volatility from 3 countries controlling the market. Sodium is pulled from salt, which is abundant in seawater and mined in dozens of countries and accessible to nearly every nation on the planet, which means your EV battery doesn't depend on 3 countries controlling the supply anymore, and your car doesn't carry a geopolitical risk premium. That cost advantage is why lithium prices have started spiking again in 2025 and 2026, because mining operations in China got their licenses frozen, which created artificial scarcity, and suddenly sodium batteries became cheaper to produce than lithium batteries again. When CATL pulled forward their mass production plans for mid-2026, It was because customers started calling and saying they were ready to take delivery and sign orders, because the math finally worked in sodium's favor and they couldn't ignore the supply advantage anymore. The first production passenger vehicle using sodium batteries will be the Chang'an Nevo A06, arriving mid-2026, and this isn't a niche product for a specific market segment or a luxury vehicle for early adopters, but a mainstream passenger car that will prove sodium can compete with lithium on every metric that actually matters to drivers. CATL will supply its advanced Naxtra sodium batteries across Chang'an's full brand portfolio, including Avata and Deepal and Kiyuan, which means multiple vehicles hitting the market with sodium technology in 2026 and giving customers real choices. When those vehicles hit the market, the conversation changes because customers will be able to walk into dealerships and choose between a lithium EV and a sodium EV side by side. And the sodium EV will cost less and last longer and work better in cold weather and charge faster. That's not a small advantage or a marginal improvement. That's a complete disruption of the current EV market, because manufacturers have been charging lithium premiums for years while telling themselves there was no alternative, and that battery degradation was just something customers had to accept. But here's the part that reveals why the West is panicking. Because this was never really just about one battery or one innovation. While CATL and BYD were shipping sodium batteries, Naxtra Energy, the only American company with real sodium battery development, shut both of its facilities and cancelled a $1.4 billion factory in September 2025. The only US company with actual sodium orders was gone, which means America doesn't have a domestic sodium battery supplier at all. And when LG Energy Solution, the Korean giant that supplies Volkswagen and General Motors and Tesla, needed to develop sodium cells they didn't build in Korea or in America, but went to China with a pilot plant in Nanjing and a materials deal with a Chinese partner. Read that twice because it tells you everything about where the battery war is being won. CATL and BYD alone now hold over half the world's electric vehicle battery market, which means they control the supply to the vast majority of EV manufacturers on the planet. But the battery market for cars is just the start because sodium is flooding into grid storage, where China already runs a 100 megawatt sodium battery station powering entire regions, and it's moving into heavy trucks and into swap stations and into entire electrical grids. The global sodium-ion battery market is projected to leap from $1.39 billion in 2025 to nearly $7 billion by 2034, which is a five-fold increase in less than a decade, and shows this isn't a niche, but a second front in the energy race where one country is fighting it almost alone. When the Chang'an Nevo A06 hits the market mid-2026, with a sodium battery that lasts 10,000 cycles and works in -40-degree weather and costs less to produce than lithium, the entire EV industry has to reset its strategy, because suddenly the lithium premium doesn't make sense anymore. Manufacturers who built their supply chains around lithium contracts and long-term commitments will be scrambling to pivot because their cost structure is now higher than competitors using sodium, which means their cars have to cost more or their margins get squeezed. That's an industry disruption that ripples through production planning and supply chains and stock prices because the assumptions that every automaker has been working with just changed. For current EV owners, sitting with lithium batteries that are degrading on schedule, this is the moment they realize their trade-in value is about to drop, because the next generation of EVs with sodium batteries will cost less and last longer and perform better in winter, which means their lithium EV becomes the inferior product the moment sodium hits the market at scale. For EV shoppers who are waiting to buy, mid-2026 becomes the inflection point where prices potentially drop, because manufacturers have to compete with sodium alternatives. The discount that wasn't there last year will be there next quarter, and the EV that costs $45,000 today might cost $35,000 by spring when sodium production ramps up and manufacturers realize they can't charge lithium premiums anymore. For battery companies stuck with lithium supply agreements, this is the moment they have to absorb losses or renegotiate because their product is becoming obsolete. For countries that control lithium, this is the moment their leverage disappears because there's suddenly an alternative that's cheaper and better. And for America, which walked away from sodium battery development years ago while China kept investing. This is the moment they're watching from the sidelines as the market they invented gets taken over by competitors who showed up to the game. The West kept doubling down on lithium while watching its only sodium startup collapse, and China quietly built a battery out of salt that, if half of CATL's claims hold up, makes today's EVs look like a transition phase we'll barely remember. What do you think? Drop your answer in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching.